asked you to contemplate were the basis of the investigation by the FBI, and these are the facts that you, Director Comey, chose to hold unworthy of a recommendation to prosecute, saying that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. We, as Congress and the American people, are troubled how such gross negligence is not punished, and why there seems to be a different standard for the politically well-connected, particularly if your name is Clinton. Mr. Director, I look forward to your testimony today. And this time, I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte. Welcome again, Director Comey, for your appearance here today. The FBI's mission is a complex undertaking to protect the United States from terrorism, to enforce our criminal laws, and to lead the nation's law enforcement community. That mission ought to mirror our own priorities in this committee. In the past few days, for example, we have witnessed near-fatal terrorist attacks in Minnesota, New York, and New Jersey. These attacks underscore the growing fear that individuals can be moved to violence at home by the propaganda of ISIS and other terrorist groups abroad, even though they have no direct connection to those organizations. To me, this threat is dire. We should be doing all we can within our communities and within our constitutional framework to mitigate the danger. But will our majority here in the House use their time today to discuss these attacks? I suspect that they will not be in their focus in this campaign season. In Charlotte, in Tulsa, in Dallas, right here in Washington, and in other cities across this country, our citizens demand answers to questions about race and policing and the use of lethal force by law enforcement. Our police are under siege, often under-resourced, and in some cases, hard-pressed to build trust with the communities they serve. Director Comey, your continued work to foster lines of communication between police officers and the general public is commendable and necessary if we are to keep our citizens safe from harm. But will my colleagues discuss this pressing issue with the director of the FBI, whose leadership in the law enforcement community is paramount? I hope so. I'm also afraid their focus may be elsewhere. The FBI is the lead agency in the investigation of cyber-based terrorism, computer intrusions, online sexual exploitation, and major cyber fraud. We've known for some years about the persistent cyber threat to our critical infrastructure. Now we hear reports of a new cyber threat to the very basis of our democratic process. Twice this summer, Director Comey, I wrote to you with my fellow ranking members to ask you to look into reports that Russian state actors are working to undermine our election process. Without objection, Mr. Chairman, I ask that both these letters be placed in the record.
Without objection, they will be made a part of the record.
Thank you. It is now the clear consensus of the intelligence community that the Russian government was behind the hack of the Democratic National Committee, and not, as some suggested, somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds. On Friday, we learned that from one report that the United States intelligence officials are seeking to determine whether an American businessman identified by Donald Trump as one of his foreign policy advisors, has opened up private communications with senior Russian officials, including talks about the possible lifting of economic sanctions if the Republican nominee becomes president. The report cites to an unnamed, quote, senior U.S. law enforcement official, end quote, which I presume means someone in your orbit, Mr. Director. Without objection, I ask that this article, Mr. Chairman, be placed into the record as well.
Without objection, it will be made part of the record.
Thank you. Let me be clear. If true, this allegation represents a danger to our national security and a clear violation of federal law, which expressly prohibits this type of back-channel negotiation. And I'm not alone in describing the nature of this threat. Speaker Ryan himself has said that Russia is a global menace led by a devious thug. Putin should stay out of this election, end quotation. But will our majority join us and press you on this problem today, Director Comey? Instead, I believe that the focus of this hearing will be more of the same, an attack on you and your team at the Department of Justice for declining to recommend criminal charges against Secretary Hillary Clinton. In recent weeks, this line of attack has been remarkable only for its lack of substance. Your critics dwell in character assassination and procedural minutiae, like the proper scope of immunity agreements and your decision to protect the identities of individuals wholly unrelated to the investigation. They want to investigate the investigation, Director Comey, and I consider that an unfortunate waste of this committee's time. With so many actual problems confronting this nation, and so many of those challenges within your jurisdiction and ours, you would think my colleagues would set their priorities differently. I hope that they do, and they listen to our conversation today. I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers, and without objection, all other members' opening statements will be made a part of the record. We welcome our distinguished witness, and if you would please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. FBI Director James Comey is a graduate of the College of William and Mary and the University of Chicago Law School. Following law school, Director Comey served as an assistant United States attorney for both the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia. He returned to New York to become the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and in 2003, he served as the Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice. Director Comey, we look forward to your testimony. Your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety, and we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. You may begin. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Conyers, members of the Judiciary Committee. It's good to be back before you, as the chairman said, for the 4th time. I have 6 more to go, and I look forward to our conversations each time. I know that this morning there will be questions about these
computers, these laptops. Why were they then allowed to sit in on the interview with Secretary Clinton?
Right. The Department of Justice reached a letter agreement with the 2 lawyers to give them what's called act of production immunity, meaning nothing that's found on the laptop they turn over will be used against them directly, and which is a fairly normal tool in investigations. They were, Ms. Mills in particular was a member of the Secretary Clinton's legal team, and so Secretary Clinton decides which of her lawyers come to voluntary interviews with the FBI.
Is it usual to allow a witness or potential witness in a subsequent prosecution, had one been undertaken, to be present in the room when the FBI interviews another witness and potential target of an investigation?
The FBI has no ability to exclude or include any lawyer that a subject being interviewed chooses to have there.
Even if the lawyer is a witness in the case, can you cite any other instance in which a witness to a criminal investigation who has already been interviewed by the FBI has been allowed to accompany and serve as legal counsel to the target of that investigation?
I can't from personal experience. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened. The Department of Justice, the FBI has no ability to decide who comes to an interview in a voluntary interview context. If it was a judicial proceeding, a judge could police who could be there, and obviously lawyers are governed by canons of ethics to decide what matters they can be involved in, but it doesn't fall to us to say you can be in, you can't be in.
But wouldn't you agree that it is a conflict of interest for them to serve as attorneys for Secretary Clinton in this matter, having been interviewed by the FBI as witnesses?
That's a question a lawyer has to answer for him or herself.
You're a lawyer, Director Comey. What's your opinion of that?
Oh, I don't want to offer an opinion on that, but that's something a lawyer has to decide for themselves. I assume with counsel and consulting our canons of ethics, what matters you can be involved in and what you can't. But again, the Bureau's role in conducting a voluntary interview is to interview the subject. Who they bring is up to them.
How can you trust the veracity of Secretary Clinton's answers, knowing that witnesses previously interviewed by the FBI were allowed to participate in the interview?
This database will be up and running because everybody gets why it matters so much.
Thank you. On August 30th, I wrote to you regarding Donald Trump's extensive connections to the Russian government. The letter cites to a number of troubling reports, some that suggest mere conflicts of interest, others that might suggest evidence of a crime. Last Friday, we read a new report suggesting that Mr. Trump's foreign policy advisor has been meeting with high-ranking sanctioned officials in Moscow to discuss lifting economic sanctions if Mr. Donald Trump becomes president. The same report quotes quote, a senior United States law enforcement official who says that this relationship is being, quote, actively monitored and investigated, end quotation. Is the FBI investigating the activities of Mr. Trump or any advisor to the Trump campaign with respect to any line of communication between the campaign and the Russian government?
I can't say, sir. As I said in response to a different question from the chairman, we don't confirm or deny investigations.
Well, more generally then, is it lawful for a private citizen to enter into official government negotiations with a foreign nation?
I don't think it's appropriate for me to answer that hypothetical.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my view, our research shows that it is not. The Logan Act, 18 U.S.C. Section 953, prohibits this conduct, in my view. And finally, does Mr. Trump currently receive intelligence briefings from the FBI?
Both candidates and their running mates are offered on a regular basis briefings from the entire intelligence community. Some portion of the first briefing included an FBI segment. So yes.
Does his staff attend those meetings as well?
No, just the candidate and the vice presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm. And finally, if a member of either
I'm wrong. I'm sorry, I got to correct what I said. Each was allowed to bring two people. And as I recall, Mr. Trump did bring two individuals with clearances to the briefing. Secretary Clinton did not. I'm sorry, I misstated that.
All right. Finally, if a member of either campaign were engaged in secret back-channel communications with a foreign adversary, could that line of communication pose a threat to national security?
Mr. Conyers, I don't think it's appropriate, given that I'm not commenting on whether we have an investigation, to answer hypotheticals that might make it look like I'm commenting on whether we have an investigation. So I'd prefer not to answer that, sir.
Well, thank you for being here today, and I thank the chairman and yield back.
Sure. Thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me express my admiration and thanks to the FBI for the professional manner and excellent work they did in the bombings that occurred in New York about a block out of my district to apprehend the suspect within, 48 hours and do everything was a very good indication of teamwork and of professionalism, and I congratulate you on that. Secondly, let me say that I think that the mud that is being thrown from the other side of this table here continually only because of the ongoing presidential election, in the case in which the FBI decided there was nothing to prosecute, it's over. And we all know nobody would be even talking about it if if Hillary Clinton weren't a presidential candidate. This is pure political maneuvering. But let me talk about a case that may pose a current national security threat to the United States, and ask you a few questions about that. In his earlier remarks, Mr. Conyers referenced an August 30th letter from the ranking members of a number of House committees. That letter asked whether the FBI was investigating troubling connections between Trump campaign officials and Russian interests, and whether they contributed to the illegal hacking of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic National Campaign Committee. You're familiar with that letter, I take it?
Yes, I'm familiar with the letter.
I'd like to ask you a few questions. The letter said this, and I quote, on August 8th, 2016, Roger Stone, a Donald Trump confidant, revealed that he has communicated with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange about the upcoming release of additional illegally hacked Democratic documents. Mr. Stone made these statements during a Republican campaign event while answering a question about a potential October surprise. Obviously, if someone is stating publicly that he is in direct communication with the organization that obtained these illegally hacked documents, I assume the FBI would want to talk to that person. Has the FBI interviewed Roger Stone about his communications with Julian Assange or his knowledge of how WikiLeaks got these illegally obtained documents?
I can't comment on that.
Mr. Stone stated that he has knowledge about upcoming leaks of additional illegally hacked documents. Has the FBI asked him about those communications?
I also can't comment on that.
Because it's an ongoing investigation?
I don't want to confirm whether there is or is not an investigation. That's the way I answered Mr. Conyers' questions as well.
Director Comey, the FBI acknowledged in public statements and testimony that it was investigating Secretary Clinton's use of a private email server, and that was while the investigation was still ongoing. Now you can't comment on whether there's an investigation. Is there a different standard for Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump? If not, what is the consistent standard?
No, our standard is we do not confirm or deny the existence of investigations. There's an exception for that when there is a need for the public to be reassured, when it's obvious, it's apparent given our activities, public activities, that the investigation is ongoing. But our overwhelming rule is we do not comment except in certain exceptional circumstances.
Aren't there exceptional circumstances when close officials to a candidate of a major political party for the United States says publicly that he's in communication with foreign officials and anticipates further illegal activity?
I don't think so.
Mr. Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, resigned after failing to disclose his role in assisting a pro-Russian party in Ukraine. The Associated Press reported, and I quote, Donald Trump's campaign chairman helped a pro-Russian party in Ukraine secretly route $2.2 million in payments to two prominent Washington lobbying firms in 2012, and did so in a way that effectively obscured the foreign political party's efforts to influence U.S. policy. Has the FBI interviewed Mr. Manafort about his failure to disclose his work for this foreign government, as federal law requires?
I have to give you the same answer, Mr. Nadler.
Has the FBI interviewed Rick Gates, who reportedly still works for the Trump campaign, about his involvement in this scheme?
Same answer, sir.
Director Comey, after you investigated Secretary Clinton, you made a decision to explain publicly who you interviewed and why. You also disclosed documents, including notes from those interviews. Why shouldn't the American people have the same level of information about your investigation of those associated with Mr. Trump?
I'm not confirming that we're investigating people associated with Mr. Trump. In the matter of the email investigation, it was our judgment, my judgment, and the rest of the FBI's judgment that those were exceptional circumstances where the public needed transparency.
Okay, my final question is the following. You investigated Secretary Clinton's emails and so forth, everything we've been talking about. You concluded, I believe quite properly, that there was nothing to prosecute. And you announced, in my opinion, quite properly, that you had investigated it and that there was nothing there, or there was nothing to prosecute. That was proper. But having announced, when a prosecutorial agency announces that we've investigated so-and-so and we've decided to prosecute because, or we've investigated so-and-so and we've decided not to prosecute because, why is it appropriate for that prosecutorial agency to go further and say, even though we've decided not to prosecute, we still think this person did this, that, or the other thing, and it was proper or improper? Why is it proper for a prosecutorial agency to characterize your opinion of the propriety of the actions of someone whom you have announced that you have decided there's nothing criminal and shouldn't be prosecuted?
That's a very hard decision. That's why it's the exception to the rule. You do risk damaging someone who isn't convicted. The judgment I made in this case is, given the unusual, in fact, I hope unprecedented nature of this investigation, that it was appropriate to offer that transparency. Not an easy call. I really wrestled with it, but I think on balance it was.
Let me just say, before my time expires, that I think, and I'm just talking for myself, that that was highly inappropriate, that having determined that there was nothing to prosecute and having announced that quite properly, for a prosecuting agency, for the Department of Justice to comment with comments that will be looked upon as authoritative, that what she did was right or wrong or good or bad, is not the appropriate role of a prosecuting agency, and risks, not in this case perhaps, but risk. And I talk really now because of the future. I don't want to see that happen again with regard to anybody, because it puts anybody who did not commit a crime, who you have determined, you or the Justice Department, whoever is determined, did not commit a crime, or there's no evidence sufficient to prosecute, puts them at the mercy of the opinion of an individual or individuals within the prosecuting agency, and that's just not right under our system. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, thank you for those examples of the FBI's good work in your opening statement. I think we all appreciated what the FBI has done. My first question is this. Would you reopen the Clinton investigation if you discovered new information that was both relevant and substantial?
It's hard for me to answer in the abstract. We would certainly look at any new and substantial information.
Yeah. In general, and let's impersonalize it, in general, if you discovered new information that was substantial and relevant, you would reopen an investigation, would you not?
Again, even in general, I don't think we can answer that in the abstract. What we can say is if any investigation, if people have new and substantial information, we'd like to see it so we can make an evaluation.
Okay. Let me give you
some words before you've even completed your investigation. You were aware that he'd said that, weren't you?
Yes, I saw those reported in the press.
Okay. And finally, it just seems to me here that there was clearly a double standard going on. Like, for example, if anybody else had done this, like a soldier or a serviceman who did virtually the same thing, they would have been prosecuted and were, but not Hillary Clinton. And that's a double standard, and that's not the way it's supposed to work in America. And I'm out of time. I yield back.
I disagree with that characterization, but
the gentleman is permitted to respond.
I don't think so. I actually think if we were to recommend she be prosecuted, that would be a double standard, because Mary and Joe at the FBI or some other place, if they did this, would not be prosecuted. They'd be disciplined. They'd be in big trouble in the FBI. If you did this, you would not be prosecuted. That wouldn't be fair. Okay.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you so very much. Many Americans have come to trust Hillary Clinton as a dedicated, committed public servant. But I believe it's important as we address these questions. Let me make one or 2 points. My colleagues have already made it, and I look forward maybe to coming back to Washington to dealing with the potential Russian intrusion on the election system. I'm not asking you, Director, at this time. And also the issue of connecting the dots as we deal with terrorism across America. But I do want to acknowledge Eric Williams, an outstanding detailee to this Judiciary Committee. Thank him for his service. And I want to thank the SAC in Houston, Mr. Turner, for helping us in the shooting that occurred in Houston, as you well know, that gave us a great deal of fear and scare just a couple of days ago. But Director Comey, my Republican colleagues have questioned, second-guessed, and attacked you and your team of career FBI agents. They disagree with the results of your investigation. They want you to prosecute or to have the DOJ to prosecute Secretary Clinton regardless of the facts. So they've engaged in an almost daily ritual of holding hearings, desperately trying to tear down your investigation and your recommendation. I believe you testified previously that your recommendation in that case was unanimous, and your investigation was carried out by what you called an all-star team of career agents and prosecutors. Is that right?
Yes, these were some of our very best. And sometimes because I'm lucky enough to be the person who represents the FBI, people think it's my conclusion. Sure, it's my conclusion, but I'm reporting what the team thought and their supervisors. As I said, this was, as painful as it is for people sometimes, this was not a close call.
Let me continue. You have written that the case itself was not a cliffhanger. Is that right?
Correct.
Recently, Republicans have attacked the decision to provide limited immunity to individuals during the investigation. For example, when Congressman Shavitz learned about this, he stated, and I quote, "No wonder they couldn't prosecute a case. They were handing out immunity deals like candy." I understand that the FBI does not make the final call on immunity agreements. That was the DOJ. You made that clear. So his statement was just wrong. But did you consult closely with DOJ before these immunity agreements were concluded by having facts?
Right. Our job is to tell them what facts we'd like to get access to. The prosecutor's job is to figure out how to do that. And so they negotiate. I think there were 5 limited immunity agreements of different kinds that they negotiated.
Did you or anyone at the FBI ever object to these decisions to grant immunity? Did you think they made sense?
No, it was fairly ordinary stuff.
Was the FBI or DOJ?
Matter of indictment, I don't dispute your word on this. It's what the public expectation was hanging out there is my real point. And then with that public expectation, I think the public was surprised to learn about who was or wasn't in that room. Can you tell us who was in the room involved in either listening to or conducting the interview of Hillary Clinton on that date of July 2nd, 2016?
I can't tell you for sure. I can give you a general sense. The witness and her legal team, and then on our side of the table, our agents, prosecutors from the Department of Justice. I don't know if any of our analysts were in there or not, but sort of our team, their team.
And how many of your team, how many FBI investigators?
I don't know for sure sitting here. I think we probably had 8 to 10 people on our side, prosecutors and agents. That's a knowable fact. I just don't know it sitting here.
Prosecutors. Did Loretta Lynch have her people in there?
If you mean Department of Justice lawyers, yes, sure.
So how many Department of Justice lawyers would have been there?
I don't know for sure. Again, I think it was probably about 8 people, probably about 4 lawyers, about 4 from the FBI.
Okay.
But again, I could be wrong.
I think so. About around 4 investigators, around 4 potential prosecutors from the DOJ, a couple of attorneys for Hillary Clinton herself. That would set the scene fairly closely.
I think that Secretary Clinton's team was bigger than that. I don't know the exact number.
Okay. And then when you received the counsel as to the recommendation you were to make to Loretta Lynch, I'm going to just go through this quickly. You didn't review a videotape, an audio tape, or a transcript, so you would have had to rely upon the briefings from the people that were in the room who would have been your investigative team.
Yes, the agents who conducted the interview, yes.
And they were briefing off of notes that they had taken, which are now in the SCIF, but redacted.
Right. They write them up in what's called an FBI 302.
And so Loretta Lynch had her people in the room, and they would have had access to your investigators in the room. And out of that came a piece of advice to you that she had already said she was going to hand that responsibility over to you as director of the FBI as to making the recommendation, which turned out to be the decision on whether or not to indict Hillary Clinton.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The director will answer the question.
I'm not sure I'm following it entirely. There was no advice to me from the Attorney General or any of the lawyers working for her. My team formulated a recommendation that was communicated to me, and the FBI reached its conclusion as to what to do, uncoordinated from the Department of Justice.
even though Justice was in the room with your investigators. And I'd make that final comment, and I'd yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Sure. Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Russian hacking into the databases of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, as well as Russian hacks into the voter registration systems of Illinois and Arizona, serve as ominous warnings to the American people about the risks that our electoral processes face in this modern era. Unfortunately, Trump Republicans in the House are as obsessed with Hillary Clinton's damn emails as Trump has been about President Obama's birth certificate. Just like the Donald closed his birth certificate investigation after 5 years of fruitless investigation, however, I predict that the Trump Republicans will at some point close this email persecution. The American people are sick of it. The attention of the American public is increasingly focused on the security of this nation's election infrastructure. On Monday, the ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, Senator Dianne Feinstein and Congressman Adam Schiff, issued a joint statement setting forth the current status of this investigation. It said this, and I quote, "Based on briefings we have received, we have concluded that the Russian intelligence agencies are making a serious and concerted effort to influence the U.S. election. They work closely with intelligence community individuals to be able to put that statement out to the American public." Director Comey, I don't want to ask you about any classified information, but is their statement accurate?
I can't comment on that in this forum. As I said in my opening, we are investigating to try to understand exactly what mischief the Russians might be up to in connection with our political institutions and the election system more broadly, but I don't want to comment on that at this point.
Free and fair elections are the linchpin of our society. A compromise or disruption of our election process is something that this Congress certainly should be looking into. Would you agree with that?
I can't speak, sir, to what Congress should be looking into, but the FBI is looking into this very, very hard for the reasons you say. We take this extraordinarily seriously.
Thank you. In June, the FBI Cyber Division issued a flash alert to state officials warning that hackers were attempting to penetrate their election systems. The title of the flash alert was, and I quote, "Targeting Activity Against State Board of Election Systems," end quote. The alert disclosed that the FBI is currently investigating cyber attacks against at least 2 states. Later in June, the FBI warned officials in Arizona about Russian assaults on their election system, and hackers also attacked the election system in Illinois, where they were able to download the data of at least 200,000 or up to 200,000 voters. In August, the Department of Homeland Security convened a conference call warning state election officials and offering to provide federal cybersecurity experts to help scan for vulnerabilities. And yesterday it was announced that at least 18 states have already requested election cybersecurity help to defend their election systems. Director Comey, since these flash alerts and warnings went out over this summer, I'd appreciate you letting us know whether or not there have been any additional attacks on state operations or databases since June.
There have been a variety of scanning activities, which is a preamble for potential intrusion activities, as well as some attempted intrusions at voter registration databases beyond those we knew about in July and August. We are urging the states just to make sure that their deadbolts are thrown and their locks are on, and to get the best information they can from DHS, just to make sure their systems are secure. And again, these are the voter registration systems. This is very different than the vote system in the United States, which is very, very hard for someone to hack into because it's so clunky and dispersed. It's Mary and Fred putting a machine under the basketball hoop at the gym. Those things are not connected to the Internet, but the voter registration systems are. So we urge the states to make sure you have the most current information and your systems are tight, because there's no doubt that some bad actors have been poking around.
All right. With that, I will yield back the balance of my time, and thank you, sir.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Comey, thanks for being here. I was a bit astounded when you said the FBI is unable to control who a witness coming in voluntarily brings into an interview. I've seen a lot of FBI agents.
The fifth in front of us is online trying to figure out how to remove email addresses, change evidence, later uses BleachBit, that guy who won't testify in front of Congress, and he has correspondence with Cheryl Mills, a subject of the investigation, Cheryl Mills, who also got some kind of immunity agreement, Cheryl Mills, who walked out for part of the questions during the interview with the FBI. Seems to me that's pretty compelling, and the timeline's pretty compelling as well.
I'm not following compelling of what. There's no doubt that Gambetta was involved in deleting emails.
After conversations with Cheryl Mills.
He had the OSHIT moment, as he told us. And that's why it was very important for us to interview this guy to find out who told you to do that, why did you do that. That's why he was given use of it.
You know about the Reddit post when you interviewed him?
As I said earlier, I think we did. I think our investigators did. I'm not positive as I sit here.
Mr. Chairman, the guy's trying to cover up the Reddit post where he's trying to figure out how he can cover up the email addresses. And I find that compelling, particularly in light of the fact that just the day before, he's talking with Cheryl Mills, and the State Department is on notice that the Benghazi Committee wants these very documents. I find that compelling, but obviously the FBI didn't, and this is just one more in that list of things that make this case highly unusual. I yield back.
The director is permitted to respond if he chooses to do so.
No, I don't think so.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, the FBI is tasked with very serious responsibilities. You're on the front lines trying to prevent terrorist attacks. You're investigating public corruption. And as I told your agents on a recent visit to your Miami field office, I am grateful to you and your agents, all of the women and men of the FBI, for your dedication to and commitment to the pursuit of justice. We're most grateful. Now, one critical responsibility of the FBI is to investigate when American citizens violate federal laws involving improper contacts with foreign governments. And Director Comey, if an American national goes outside government channels to negotiate with a foreign government on behalf of the United States, that's a very, very serious crime, one that would violate the Logan Act, which, as you know, is the law that prohibits unauthorized people from negotiating with foreign governments in the place of the United States government. Director Comey, would the FBI take allegations of Logan Act violations seriously? Is that within your jurisdiction?
Yes, it's within our jurisdiction.
And if you had credible evidence that someone had violated the Logan Act, would the FBI investigate that alleged violation of law?
I think we have done many Logan Act investigations over the years, and we certainly will in the future.
And am I correct in assuming that you're familiar with publicly quoted comments from various intelligence sources that have said that Russia has targeted the United States with illegal state-directed hacking?
I'm aware of the published reports.
If an American citizen, Director Comey, conducted meetings with a Russian individual who has been sanctioned by the United States about potential weakening of U.S. sanctions policy in violation of the Logan Act, would the FBI investigate?
I don't think it's appropriate to answer that. That gets too close to confirming or denying whether we have an investigation. It seems too close to real life, so I'm not going to comment.
Okay, but you have investigated Logan Act violations. It's something that's clearly within your jurisdiction. I appreciate, Director Comey, your confirming that the FBI would treat these potential violations of law both seriously and urgently, because everything that I just outlined that you said the FBI would investigate has apparently happened already. Public reports suggest that the Logan Act may have been violated by Carter Page, one of the men Donald Trump singled out as the top foreign policy advisor, though now the campaign appears eager to revise Mr. Page's role, given the attention rightly being given to his illicit negotiations with a sanctioned Russian official. I've read reports from Yahoo News from last week that law enforcement may already be looking into this issue, and I assume we all agree that the allegations are very serious. Russia, a nation that hacks America, a nation that continues to enable the Assad regime to slaughter the Syrian people, a nation that threatens and violates the territorial integrity of its neighbors and our European allies. It is a dangerous violation of federal law if Donald Trump's advisor, Carter Page, is engaging in freelance negotiations with Russia. And here's what we know. In March, Donald Trump named Carter Page as a foreign policy advisor. In July, Mr. Page traveled to Moscow to give a speech that was harshly critical of the United States. And during that trip, Mr. Page is reported to have also met with a Russian official named Igor Sechin, a member of Vladimir Putin's inner circle and the president of the petroleum company Rosneft, who was sanctioned by the United States under Executive Order 13361, prohibiting him from traveling to the United States or conducting business with U.S. firms. So Mr. Sechin has a clear and personal interest in lifting U.S. sanctions against him and other top Russian officials put in place by President Obama after Russia's military action in Ukraine. Now, if these two men met to discuss sanctions policy or a lifting of sanctions under a potential Trump administration, this would be enormously concerning. Just last week, the press reported that U.S. intelligence officials are seeking to determine whether an American businessman identified by Donald Trump as one of his foreign policy advisors has opened up private communications with senior Russian officials, including talks about possible lifting of sanctions. Mr. Comey, it is illegal if Trump's advisor met with Russians who have been sanctioned by the United States about lifting these sanctions, and I am grateful for your reassurances this morning that the FBI would investigate potential violations of the Logan Act by any individual who engages in unauthorized negotiations with a foreign government. I remind my colleagues that Donald Trump invited Russia to hack the United States. I remind my colleagues that Donald Trump suggested breaking America's long-standing commitment to our NATO allies and weakening U.S. sanctions against Russia. Is there a connection between these reckless and dangerous policy proposals and the potential violation of the Logan Act by Donald Trump's Russia advisor? Mr. Comey, we appreciate very much the FBI's vigilance in pursuing justice. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman is permitted to respond if he chooses to do so. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director, for being here. I think we worked on a couple of cases together, our districts. Would you clarify something for me on active production immunity? Does active production immunity go beyond this scenario that I'm going to state? You ask for a computer from a witness. You give that witness act of production immunity that, in my interpretation, is that the agent who has that now in his or her hands, the witness is immune from the agent getting on the stand and saying, that person, this is that person's computer because they gave it to me. Does it go beyond that? Or was there additional immunity for Ms. Mills stating that anything on that computer cannot be used against her?
As I recall it, Congressman, the active production immunity for Ms. Mills was, you give us this computer, we will not use, we the Justice Department, anything we find on the computer directly against you in connection with investigation or prosecution for mishandling of classified information. I think that's how they defined it.
But that goes beyond act of production. Doesn't act of production simply state that I'm the agent, I can't get on the stand and say that belongs to that individual because they simply gave it to me? It sounds like more additional immunity was given that says, and what is on this we cannot hold against you.
Well, I think of it as I still think of it as an act of production immunity. That, from my experience, that's what I would characterize that agreement. I guess you're right. There could be a more limited form of act of production immunity, which simply says your fact of giving us this object will not be used against you directly. I'd have to think through whether it can be parsed that way. But I think I take your point.
So that's why I'm saying additional immunity was given, and I don't think it was warranted at that point. Let me ask you a question. We both impaneled many grand juries, investigative grand juries. Why not impanel an investigative grand jury whereby you have reasonable suspicion that a crime may have been committed, and then you have the ability to get warrants, subpoenas, get this information, subpoena witnesses before the grand jury under oath, and if they take the fifth, if it's not the target, if they take the fifth, they simply and say, I'm not going to talk to you, you can give them, whether it's use immunity, the AG can give them that, and you had that authority, and then transactional has to come from the judge. And if they refuse to testify then you can say, fine, we're going to take you before a judge, hold you in contempt, and then you're going to sit in jail until you answer our questions. Wouldn't that have been much simpler and more effective than the way this has gone about? I know that I've done it many, many times, and sometimes we find a situation where there isn't enough evidence, and most of the time we find there is enough evidence.
Yeah, no, it's a reasonable question. And I don't want to talk about grand jury in connection with this case.
That's why I posed it the way I
did. Right. From our training, we know we're never supposed to talk about grand jury publicly, but I can answer more generally than that. If anytime you're talking about the
we're all afraid. And they're based on largely your comment that we don't have the database to really vet these folks. Anything I can tell the folks back in Michigan that we're doing, other than all I say now is we just have to wait for a new president, because this president has increased the number of refugees by 60% and 30% year over year the last 2 years. We just have to wait for a new president. I'd like to be able to say the FBI is doing something different than they were doing last year when you made those comments.
Well, as I said earlier, they can know that we are, if there is a whiff about this person, somewhere in the U.S. government's vast holdings, we will find it. And the second thing they can know is if we get a whiff about somebody once they're in, we're going to cover that in a pretty tight way. What I can't promise people is that if I can't query what's not in our holdings. That's the only reservation I offer to people.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Well, Director Comey, during questioning earlier, there was a dispute that arose over the contents of one or more of the immunity letters that were issued, particularly with regard to the issue of whether or not it contained immunity for destroying documents, emails. The individual who was questioning you about that was former Chairman Issa of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and I want him to be able to clarify, because we have contacted the Department of Justice and asked them to read the immunity letters to us. So the gentleman is recognized briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be very brief. Under the immunity agreement with one or more individuals, we'll use Cheryl Mills as clearly one of the individuals. She negotiated a very, very good deal from what we can discover. She did not just receive immunity related to the production of the drive, the computer, and the contents, but in fact received immunity under 793, 18 U.S.C. 793E and F, 1924, U.S.C. 1920, 18 U.S.C. 1924, and the so-called David Petraeus portion, 18 U.S.C. 2071. And I'll focus on 2071. Her immunity is against any and all taking, destruction, or even obstruction, the way we read it, of documents classified or unclassified. Now, the only question I have for you is, and I know you're going to put this to justice, and we may have to ask them separately, for the purposes of what you needed as an investigator, because you were the person that wanted access to the computer, is that deal make any sense to, in return for things which she could have objected to as an attorney and held back, but which had no known proffer of leading to some criminal indictment of somebody else, she received complete immunity, as we read it, from obstruction or destruction of documents classified and unclassified, and that's based on a re-review of the immunity agreement.
Yeah, I think You're right. This is a question best addressed to Justice, but I think you're misunderstanding it. As I understand it, this was a promise in writing from the Department of Justice. If you give us the laptops, we will not use anything on the laptops directly against you in a prosecution for that list of offenses. It's not immunity for those offenses if there's some other evidence. Now, that said, I'm not exactly sure why her lawyer asked for it, because by that point in the investigation, we didn't have a case on her to begin with.
Well, I understand that, but based on the Reddit discovery and others, they asked me to do it, and you said so yourself. It was probably Cheryl Mill, they. You have an immune witness who has to tell you who they were. If they were told me to delete, and that's Cheryl Mills, then in fact you have evidence from an immune witness of a crime perpetrated by Cheryl Mills, the ordering of the destruction of any document, classified or unclassified, which clearly she seems to have done.
But she wouldn't be protected from that. If we developed evidence that she had obstructed justice in some fashion, all she's protected from is we can't use as evidence something that's on the laptop she gave us. We can still prosecute her.
Right. So the information put into the record today, which included these Reddit discoveries, show that there is a they who asked to have the destruction of information under 18 U.S.C. 2071. If she doesn't have immunity for that order, she could, and by definition should be charged, because ordering somebody else to destroy something as an attorney well after there were subpoenas in place that were very specific, that's clearly a willful act, isn't it?
Mr. Chairman, would you yield?
Of course.
Your line of questioning, first let me show my cards. I believe that Cheryl Mills has an impeccable character, as my line of questioning suggested that Director Comey and his staff have impeccable character. But my good friend, there's immunity given. I don't think this applies to Ms. Mills, and I looked at the sections that you're speaking of. If you take local criminal and state actions given to the worst of characters for a variety of reasons, that was not the reason given to Ms. Mills. I am assured that it is a lawyer that was trying to be the most effective counsel to Ms. Mills as possible.
Well, reclaiming my time, the gentlelady's point may be true. I'm only speaking to the director based on things were done that should not have been done. We now have evidence in front of this committee, in the record, of people destroying records of activities as late as a few days ago. So the fact that there still should be an open question, first of all, is could she be prosecuted? And if, in fact, they have told me to destroy this, under the exact same statute that included David Petraeus's, who was no longer on active duty, 18 U.S.C. 2071, there's at least a case to be made. Now, the problem we have is the lawyer negotiated a set of terms which hopefully doesn't mean that she gets a free pass, even if she willfully ordered the destruction of documents, which it does appear she did. And look, my job is not to be judge, jury, or hangman. My job is to look at what's been presented to us, ask the highest law enforcement officer in the land to, in fact, look into it, because it does appear as though it is there.
A brief yield, my good friend.
Of course.
Certainly, we have an oversight responsibility of the director. I think he's been very forthright. But none of the actions of destruction can be attributed. I don't think we have anything in evidence to suggest that Ms. Mills contributed to the dictating or directing.
Well, the gentlelady may not have been.
Destruction.
The gentlelady may not have been here.
We can't speculate here.
The gentlelady may not have been here at the time, but the director himself, when asked who would they would have been in that order to destroy, at least said it probably was or likely could have been Cheryl Mills. We're not saying it is. What we're saying is you have an immune witness.
The gentleman will suspend.
Of course.
The purpose of this was to set the record straight as to what the content of the document was. That has been accomplished, and the debate will continue on, but it will continue on outside of this hearing room.
And I would only
ask, speculate.
And I would only ask that the director be able to review those documents at justice and follow up with the committee. Would be very helpful to all of us. I thank the chairman.
The director has answered in the affirmative that he will do that.
Yes, we'll follow up.
First of all, I want to thank Director Comey. We didn't make 4 hours and 40 minutes, but we did almost make 4 hours, and I know you have been generous with your time. However, I will also say that I think a lot of the questions here indicate a great deal of concern about the manner in which this investigation was conducted, how the conclusions were drawn, and the close proximity to that, and the meeting of the Attorney General with former President Clinton on a tarmac. At the same time, she then said, well, I'm going to recuse myself, and then shortly after that, you took over and announced your conclusions in this case, which are hotly disputed, as you can tell. The committee and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee have referred to the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of for the District of Columbia, referral based upon her testimony before the Select Committee on Benghazi, suggesting that your statement at your press conference and your testimony before the Oversight and Government Reform Committee very clearly contradicted a number of statements she made under oath before that committee. And I want to stress to you how important I think it is that we made that referral for the purpose of making sure that no one is above the law. And in many cases regarding investigations, it is not just the underlying actions that are important, but they are the efforts of people to cover those up through perjury, through obstruction of justice, through destruction of documents. And so I would ask that this matter be taken very, very seriously as you pursue whatever actions the Department chooses to take, making sure that no one is above the law.
Thank you, sir.
With that, concludes today's hearing, and I thank our distinguished witnesses for attending. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record, and the hearing is adjourned.